He slid the divorce papers across the table on their 5th wedding anniversary, and the sound of the envelope against polished wood felt louder than the city below. The sourdough was still rising in the oven when he told her she no longer fit the life he was building. Emma Walker had spent the afternoon constructing the evening like a quiet apology for months of distance she did not fully understand. The candles were the same ivory set they had bought on a rain-soaked trip to the coast back when Grant still reached for her hand without thinking. White roses stood in a crystal vase because he once said white meant beginnings, and she had clung to that word as if it were a promise. Flour dusted her fingers, and the apartment smelled of yeast and warmth, a soft domestic heartbeat beneath the glittering Seattle skyline. She believed love could be coaxed back with patience like dough that needed time to rise. Grant Hollis did not sit. He remained standing tall and composed in a charcoal suit that fit like tailored ambition. He did not notice the roses or the bread, or the way her hands trembled slightly at her sides. He placed the envelope between them and said evenly, "Sign these tonight. I need you out by morning. No anger, no hesitation. Just certainty." Emma laughed because disbelief is sometimes kinder than truth. "Happy anniversary," she said almost lightly. But he had already moved past her. He lifted his phone and turned the screen toward her. A woman in a red silk dress filled the frame, dark hair cascading over bare shoulders, diamonds blazing at her throat. Emma recognized the necklace instantly. She had once paused before that display case, pointing at it with a half smile, joking that one day it might sit against her own skin. "Maybe for Christmas," Grant had said then. "I bought it for her," he said now, voice cool and clinical. "She looks like she belongs in that world." The woman was Nina Carlisle, vice president of marketing, the senator's daughter, who always stood a little too close to him at corporate galas. Grant poured himself a glass of single malt without offering her one. Tomorrow, he continued, Northbridge Systems finalizes the Astra Meridian acquisition. After that, everything changes. I step into a different circle. Davos. Private summits. Rooms where influence is currency. His gaze drifted over her sweater, her flower-streaked cheek, the softness she had never tried to hide. I cannot walk into that world with someone who thinks baking bread and volunteering at shelters is ambition. The words did not shout. They sliced. Emma felt something colder than anger settle inside her. Recognition. He explained the rest with the efficiency of a man closing a deal. The penthouse lease had been transferred solely to his name 3 months earlier. The car she drove belonged to the company. The joint account they had built together had been emptied and redistributed 6 months ago into private holdings. Her name had been removed quietly, methodically. "You were never good with numbers," he added, as if that excused the betrayal. "The settlement is generous. A condo in Portland. A basic vehicle. $50,000 upon signature. 5 years reduced to a figure small enough to fit on a single line." The oven timer chimed softly from the kitchen. The scent of bread deepened rich and golden, painfully alive. Emma stared at the papers, but saw instead the early mornings when she had edited his presentations, the nights she had stayed awake while he rehearsed pitches, the way he once whispered that he could not have done any of it without her. She had believed in him before investors did. She had chosen him when he was still unknown. Now he was choosing a different future, and he was rewriting the past to justify it. "I am staying at the Fairmont tonight," Grant said, checking his watch. "Nina will oversee the redesign here tomorrow. Leave the keys on the counter. Do not make this difficult. You cannot afford the lawyers I can." He moved toward the door, pausing only once. "Take that sweater with you," he added without turning around. "I do not want her finding it." The door closed with a soft, decisive click. The oven timer began to beep again, insistent now. Emma did not move. Smoke curled faintly as the crust darkened too far. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold marble floor, the divorce papers untouched above her. 5 years, she whispered into the silence. Erased in 5 minutes. Outside, the city shimmered, unaware that inside the glass tower, a man believed he had just upgraded his life. He did not know that the father he mocked as a dirt-stained nobody controlled forces that could dismantle his empire in a single morning. He did not know that the woman he called small had just reached the end of shrinking, and when a woman stops shrinking, the world around her has to adjust. By midnight, Emma understood that the divorce was not an impulse. It was an execution. She moved through the penthouse like a guest who had overstayed her welcome opening drawers with slow, disbelieving hands. The candles had burned low wax pooling onto the polished surface she once dusted every week. The sourdough sat untouched on the counter, its crust hardened, split imperfectly down the center. The air still carried warmth, but the room felt stripped of oxygen. Emma walked into Grant's home office because something inside her needed proof, needed to see the architecture of what he had done. She opened the filing cabinet first. Inside, neatly tabbed and dated, were bank statements she did not recognize. The joint account they had built together showed a zero balance 6 months earlier. Transfers had been made in stages clean and deliberate, siphoned into holding companies with names that sounded like empty shells. Her name disappeared from the documents like it had been erased with a careful hand. The penthouse lease amendment sat clipped beneath a folder labeled Corporate Housing. Signed 3 months ago. Sole occupant, Grant Hollis. Emma felt her throat tighten, not with tears yet, but with humiliation. He had been dismantling her life while kissing her goodnight. She opened the closet next. Half the shelves were empty. His travel bags were gone, important watches missing. He had packed in advance. The realization settled with brutal clarity. He had not walked into the apartment uncertain tonight. He had walked in prepared. The divorce papers were not a decision. They were the final step of a plan already executed. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A message from Tessa Morales. "I'm on my way. Do not sign anything. Do not touch anything else." Emma exhaled slowly and leaned against the wall. She had made 2 calls after Grant left. The first to Tessa, the second to her father. She had not meant to dial him so late, but when he answered on the second ring, his voice steady and unhurried, something inside her broke. He did not ask questions. He only said, "I'm here, Em. Tell me everything." Now she returned to the desk and opened the bottom drawer. Beneath a stack of quarterly reports lay a second phone. Cheap. Unmarked. Disposable. Emma stared at it as if it might explode. Grant prided himself on control, on discretion. He would not risk secrets on his primary device. Her pulse quickened. Evidence. The word echoed in her mind like a lifeline. The door swung open without a knock. Tessa entered in sneakers and a worn hoodie carrying urgency like a weapon. First question she said immediately, "Did you sign?" Emma shook her head. "Good." Tessa set her bag down and scanned the room with sharp, assessing eyes. "He planned this, didn't he?" Emma nodded once. Tessa's jaw tightened. "Then we plan better." They moved fast. Photos of every room, close-ups of documents, screenshots of statements, timestamp everything Tessa instructed. Courts love timestamps. Emma photographed the drawer with the second phone but did not touch it. Smart Tessa murmured, "We subpoena it. Let his own secrets drag him down." By the time the clock neared 2 a.m, the penthouse no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene. Emma stood in the center of the living room and looked around one last time. 5 years of careful devotion reduced to assets and evidence. Grant believed he had erased her quietly, efficiently. He did not realize that in trying to control every detail he had left behind a trail. And Emma, the woman he called small, was finally beginning to see it clearly. Emma left the penthouse before dawn, carrying one overnight bag and the silence of a life that had just collapsed behind her. The drive south toward Tacoma felt unreal, as if the city lights were dissolving in her rearview mirror one by one. Rain streaked across the windshield in thin silver lines, and the highway was nearly empty at that hour, the world suspended between night and morning. She had not slept. Tessa's words still echoed in her mind. Document everything. Do not panic. He is counting on you panicking. But panic had already burned itself out, replaced by something colder and steadier. Grant had erased her financially, socially, legally. What he had not erased was her ability to think. Her father's house sat at the end of a narrow gravel road bordered by towering evergreens. It was small, wooden, practical. A place that smelled of earth and sawdust and coffee. When Emma pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Raymond Walker stood waiting, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn flannel jacket posture, relaxed as if this were any other visit. He did not rush toward her. He did not bombard her with questions. He simply opened his arms. That was enough. Emma stepped into them and let the tears come, the kind that had waited all night for permission. Inside the kitchen was warm. The kettle hissed softly on the stove. Ray poured coffee into two mismatched mugs and sat across from her at the small wooden table where she had done homework as a child. "Tell me," he said gently. Emma told him everything. The divorce, the affair, the financial erasure, the $50,000 as if it were compensation for 5 years of loyalty. She expected anger from him, or outrage, or the wounded pride of a father insulted by a son-in-law who had mocked his calloused hands and dirt-stained boots. Ray did not interrupt once. When she finished, silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Ray stared into his coffee for a long moment, then looked up at her with eyes that had seen more than he ever shared. "Did he mention the acquisition?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded. "Astra Meridian. He said it would make him a billionaire." Ray's mouth curved in a faint, almost amused smile. "Billionaire," he repeated, as if tasting the word. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. "Emma, there is something I should have told you a long time ago." She felt her spine straighten instinctively. Ray had always been a man of few words, a gardener by trade, a quiet presence at the edges of her polished corporate life. Grant had dismissed him more than once, calling him provincial, outdated, irrelevant. Emma had defended him, but part of her had accepted the difference in worlds. Now her father's gaze held a steadiness that unsettled her. "I have investments," he said carefully. "Significant ones. I built them a long time ago. I chose to keep my life simple because I wanted you to build yours without shadows." "How significant?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ray's expression did not change. "Enough that your husband's deal is not as large as he believes it is. Enough that Astra Meridian does not move without my approval." The words did not land all at once. They unfolded slowly like a horizon widening. Emma stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who fixed his own fence with wire and patience with the implication of what he had just said. "You are telling me," she began carefully, "that you own Astra Meridian." "I control it," he corrected softly. "Through layers. Quietly. For decades. I never needed the spotlight." Emma felt the room tilt slightly, not from shock alone, but from realization. Grant had mocked this man, had sneered at his boots, had called him small. Ray reached across the table and placed his rough hand over hers. "I need you to do something difficult," he said. "Sign the divorce papers. Give him what he thinks he wants. Let him believe he has won. When people are certain of victory, they stop watching their flanks." Emma's instinct flared in protest. "Sign them." "After everything." Ray's grip tightened slightly. "Trust me. he said, not loudly but with quiet authority. "You will not be rescued. You will stand on your own feet. But I will make sure the ground beneath him is not as stable as he thinks." For the first time since the envelope slid across the table, Emma felt something shift inside her. Not revenge, not triumph. Strategy. Grant believed he had married beneath him. He had no idea he had just declared war on a man who had spent decades building empires in silence. Grant Hollis arrived at Northbridge Systems the next morning feeling untouchable. By noon, he would learn what it felt like to stand on air. The executive floor hummed with anticipation, assistants moving quickly, legal teams reviewing binders, investors dialing in from different time zones. The Astra Meridian acquisition was the culmination of years of calculated ambition, and Grant walked through the glass doors like a man stepping onto a stage built for him. His Navy suit was immaculate, his posture relaxed but charged with expectation. Beside him, Nina Carlyle matched his stride, poised and luminous, in a tailored crimson dress, already imagining the headlines that would follow. "Did she sign?" Nina asked lightly as they approached the elevators. "Signed and gone," Grant replied with a smirk. "Back where she belongs." When the elevator doors opened onto the executive level, Grant noticed something that irritated him immediately. In the waiting area, seated on a leather sofa meant for venture capitalists and foreign dignitaries, was an older man in faded denim and worn work boots. His flannel shirt looked decades old, and a battered thermos rested beside him on the glass table. Mud marked the edge of the polished floor. Grant felt his jaw tighten. Security had clearly made a mistake. Today of all days he would not tolerate sloppiness. He crossed the room briskly. "Sir, this is a private floor," he said sharply. The man lowered his newspaper slowly. His face was weathered-lined by sun and time, his eyes an unassuming gray-blue that held no trace of apology. "I am here for the 10 o'clock meeting," he replied calmly. Grant almost laughed. "The 10 o'clock meeting is a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. It is not a community garden fundraiser. I suggest you leave before I have someone escort you out." Nina touched Grant's arm lightly, a warning to keep his temper measured, but he brushed it off. He had no patience for interruptions. The elevator chimed again. 6 men in dark suits stepped out, their movements synchronized, their expressions unreadable. "The legal team from Astra Meridian." Grant's posture shifted instantly into charm and command. "Gentlemen, welcome to Northbridge Systems." He began extending his hand toward the lead attorney. They did not take it. Instead, they walked past him without a word and stopped in front of the older man on the sofa. The lead attorney inclined his head slightly. "Good morning, sir. The documents are ready for your review." The room went silent in a way that felt almost physical. Grant turned slowly, confusion rising into disbelief. The older man stood unfolding himself with unhurried ease and removed his cap. His gaze moved to Grant, steady and almost curious. "Maintenance, was it?" he said mildly. "I suppose in some sense that is accurate. I maintain a rather large portfolio. My name is Raymond Walker. I control Astra Meridian Group." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They struck like a hammer against glass. Nina's composure cracked, first her fingers tightening at her sides. Grant felt something cold and heavy drop into his stomach. That name, Walker. His mind scrambled, rearranging memory into clarity. Raymond Walker extended his hand, dirt still visible beneath his nails. "I believe you know my daughter," he added quietly. "Emma." The room seemed to tilt. Grant's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. For 5 years, he had dismissed the man as irrelevant, a relic from a smaller life. Now the same man stood at the center of his largest deal, holding its outcome like a switch. "Let us proceed to the boardroom," Ray said calmly. "I believe there are matters of valuation we need to revisit." As they walked, Grant felt the invisible scaffolding of his certainty begin to crack. He had believed he was ascending into a new world, leaving weakness behind. He had not realized that the world he sought to enter had already been owned quietly and completely by the father of the woman he had just thrown away. The boardroom door closed with a soft, final click, and in that sound, Grant Hollis felt the first true crack in his empire. Raymond Walker did not rush to the head of the table. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if he had been entering rooms like this for decades without needing to prove it. The Astra Meridian attorneys pulled out the central chair for him without being asked. Grant noticed everything at once, the deference in their posture, the silence that followed Ray's movements, the way Nina's breathing had grown shallow beside him. The man in worn boots sat down, placed his thermos carefully on the polished table, and folded his hands as if they were about to discuss weather instead of war. "Let us review the valuation of Northbridge Systems," Ray said evenly. "The agreed acquisition price reflects projected revenue growth of 40% in the second quarter." Grant straightened instinctively, shifting into presentation mode. "Those projections are supported by internal analytics and strategic restructuring," he replied, forcing steadiness into his tone. Ray's gaze did not waver. "Strategic restructuring is one phrase for it," he said. "Securities fraud is another." The word detonated in the air. Nina turned her head sharply toward Grant. "What is he talking about?" she whispered, though she already knew enough to fear the answer. Ray slid a folder across the table. Inside were forensic accounting reports, transaction trails, offshore entities with names carefully constructed to sound legitimate. Blue Harbor Holdings, Meridian Apex Capital, shells built to hide inflated revenue and concealed debt. You adjusted the books to enhance valuation before acquisition. Ray continued calmly. You shifted liabilities into offshore accounts to present a cleaner balance sheet. You believed no one would look closely enough. Grant felt heat rise along his collar. "This is creative accounting," he snapped. "Everyone in this industry leverages structure." Ray did not blink. "You leveraged deception. There is a difference." He leaned back slightly, studying the man who had married his daughter. "For 5 years, I tolerated arrogance because I believed you loved Emma. I told myself ambition was not a crime. But when you divorced her and attempted to reduce her life to a line item, you removed my last reason to remain patient." The room had grown very still. The attorneys did not shift in their seats. Nina's fingers dug into the leather armrest as realization dawned fully. Ray tapped the report lightly. "If you were still my son-in-law, perhaps this would have been handled discreetly. A resignation, a quiet settlement, protection for the company and its employees. But you made it clear yesterday that you prefer to stand alone." "Very well. Stand alone." Grant pushed back his chair abruptly. "You cannot withdraw now. The market knows about this deal. If Astra Meridian pulls out, our stock collapses." Ray nodded once. "Correct. And when the price collapses, I will purchase controlling interest at a fraction of today's valuation. I will own Northbridge Systems outright. I will restructure it legally and ethically. And you will not be part of it." The simplicity of their plan was more terrifying than any threat. He was not bluffing. He was calculating. The doors opened again. Grant turned sharply, expecting security. Instead, Emma walked in. She wore a tailored white suit that framed her posture with quiet authority. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her expression was calm, almost serene. She did not look at Grant first. She looked at the board members lining the wall, then at Ray, then finally at the chair across from him. "Hello, Grant," she said evenly. Shock rippled through him in waves. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Ray answered before she could. "I asked her to attend. She holds an MBA from Stanford, top of her class if I recall correctly. A detail you seem to overlook." Emma took a seat at the table without asking permission. She opened the folder Ray had provided and began reviewing the pages with focused precision. For the first time since the acquisition began, Grant felt small. "Mr. Hollis," Ray said quietly. "Effective immediately, Astra Meridian withdraws its offer. Additionally, we will be filing formal reports with federal regulators regarding the discrepancies uncovered in your financial statements. Security will escort you from the premises." The finality in his voice left no room for negotiation. Grant looked at Emma, searching for hesitation for mercy, for the woman who once waited up for him with warm bread and forgiveness. He found neither. As two security officers stepped forward, the weight of the morning settled fully upon him. He had believed he was stepping into a world of power. Instead, he had walked into a room where the quietest man held the strongest hand, and the woman he dismissed had just become the one person he could no longer control. For one brief, intoxicating week, Emma believed the worst was over. She was wrong. Northbridge Systems did not collapse after Grant was escorted out. It trembled. Employees watched from glass corridors as news spread like electricity. The acquisition withdrawn. The former chief executive under investigation. Astra Meridian now holding controlling interest. And at the center of it all, Emma Walker stepping into the interim leadership role with a calm that surprised even her. She worked 18-hour days meeting department heads, combing through financial reports, calling in independent auditors to untangle the web Grant had left behind. She spoke plainly to staff not in polished investor language, but in human terms. Your jobs matter. Your pensions matter. This company is more than one man's ego. The words were not dramatic, but they were real. People listened. Ray stayed mostly in the background observing rather than directing. He offered advice when asked, never when not. "This is your ship," he told her quietly one evening. "I only ensured it did not sink." Emma absorbed the responsibility like armor. She did not want to be seen as a rescued daughter. She wanted to be seen as capable. The auditors began uncovering deeper inconsistencies, frozen accounts, falsified projections. Each discovery felt like pulling another thread from a sweater Grant had woven in secret. Then the counterattack came sharp and strategic. A major financial newspaper ran a front-page story questioning the legitimacy of Emma's appointment. Billionaire father installs daughter as puppet executive in revenge. Takeover, the headline implied. Anonymous sources inside the company described her as overwhelmed, inexperienced, emotionally unstable. A photograph accompanied the article taken years earlier at a charity shelter where Emma had volunteered on weekends. She stood behind a serving table, hair tied back, apron dusted with flour. The caption was ruthless. The new leader of a multi-billion-dollar firm serving soup days before her appointment. Emma read the article alone in her office, the city sprawling beneath her window. Her hands did not shake this time. They tightened. Nina Carlisle had not vanished quietly after the boardroom collapse. She had pivoted. And she had help. Within 48 hours, a congressional inquiry was announced questioning whether Astra Meridian had manipulated market conditions to seize Northbridge unlawfully. Nina's father, a senior senator, appeared on television speaking gravely about transparency and corporate ethics. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Tessa stormed into Emma's office with controlled fury. "They are trying to frame this as nepotism and market manipulation," she said. "They want investors nervous. They want the board scared." Emma nodded slowly. Fear moves markets faster than truth. She agreed to a live financial news interview to address the allegations directly. She prepared carefully determined not to hide behind Ray's authority. "If I am going to lead," she told her father, "they need to hear my voice." The interview began smoothly. Emma spoke about compliance, about safeguarding employees, about rebuilding trust. Then the host's expression shifted subtly. "We have someone joining us remotely," he said. The screen split. Grant appeared released on bail, impeccably dressed, composed. Emma felt the temperature in the studio drop. He spoke softly, almost regretfully. "I loved my wife," he said, "but she was fragile. Her father has always controlled the narrative. This takeover is personal revenge disguised as corporate governance." Then he held up a document. "A psychiatric evaluation." Emma's. He cited anxiety, medication, therapy sessions. He framed it as concern for shareholder confidence. The betrayal was surgical. Emma felt the weight of millions watching. For a fraction of a second, silence pressed against her ribs. Then she inhaled. "You just disclosed private medical records on national television," she said steadily. "That is a federal offense. And yes, I have anxiety. Many people do. It does not disqualify me from integrity or leadership. What disqualifies someone is fraud, deception, and weaponizing a woman's health to salvage a collapsing reputation." The studio fell quiet. Grant's composure flickered for the first time. Social media ignited in her defense, but markets do not run on sympathy alone. The board of directors convened the next morning. Investors were restless. Headlines were volatile. Emma sat at the long table once more, but this time the air felt colder. The chairman cleared his throat and spoke carefully. "For the stability of the company, we are appointing an independent interim executive while the investigation proceeds." It was phrased as protection. It was removal. Emma did not argue. She gathered her folder, stood, and walked out under the watchful eyes of colleagues who looked both apologetic and afraid. In the lobby, she surrendered her access badge to security. Outside, rain streaked the glass facade, blurring the skyline. She had risen once and been pushed down again. Grant believed he had exposed her weakness. He did not yet understand that pressure applied long enough forges something harder than pride. Emma did not go home after surrendering her badge. She went to war. She walked through the rain to Tessa's apartment in Capitol Hill, soaked through but steady, her expression stripped of shock and replaced with something sharper. Tessa opened the door, took one look at her, and stepped aside without a word. They sat at the small kitchen table beneath a flickering light while steam rose from 2 mugs of coffee. "They removed you to calm investors," Tessa said bluntly, "which means they are afraid. And afraid people make mistakes." Emma nodded slowly. Grant had once told her she was too soft for corporate battle. She had believed him. Now she understood softness and strategy were not opposites. They were tools. The second phone from Grant's desk became the pivot. The subpoena had come through quietly. Forensic analysts extracted 14 months of messages, coded conversations, deleted threads, recovered line by line. Grant had not been acting alone. Nina Carlisle's name appeared repeatedly, not just in personal exchanges, but in strategic coordination. More alarming was another name threaded through the correspondence: Martin Hale, chairman of the board. Payments disguised as consulting fees, references to offshore transfers, jokes about valuation inflation. The man who had spoken of stability while removing Emma had been protecting himself. Emma requested a private meeting with Nina, not in a tower or a luxury office, but in a modest diner outside the financial district. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, coffee tasting faintly burnt. Nina arrived poised but wary, sunglasses removed only after she sat. "You wanted to see me?" she said coolly. Emma slid a folder across the table. Screenshots, timestamps, conversations that showed coordination between Nina and Martin regarding financial manipulation before the acquisition. "You leaked the story to undermine me," Emma said calmly. "But Martin will sacrifice you the moment federal investigators close in. He already has a pattern of doing so." Nina's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. "You expect me to trust you?" she asked. I expect you to survive, Emma replied. Survival requires choosing the right side. The diner noise continued around them, ordinary and indifferent. Nina understood power. She also understood exposure. Silence stretched, then broke. What do you want? She asked quietly. The truth, Emma answered. In writing. The next step required precision. Emma requested a meeting with Martin Hale under the guise of negotiating a dignified exit. She dressed simply, spoke softly. Let him believe she had accepted defeat. Martin relaxed visibly, arrogance returning like a comfortable coat. He poured bourbon in his office and spoke too freely. Grant handled the books, he admitted. I ensured the board stayed cooperative. We shared the upside. When your father interfered, we needed to neutralize you quickly. He leaned back, smiling faintly. You were never the real threat. Emma unbuttoned her jacket slightly, revealing the recording device clipped beneath. His smile vanished. She left without raising her voice. Within 48 hours, federal agents executed search warrants. Documents were seized, accounts frozen. News outlets shifted tone. The narrative of nepotism unraveled under the weight of evidence. But Emma did not rush back to television cameras. Instead, she rented a conference room at a hotel across from Northbridge headquarters and invited department heads and team leaders. 200 employees filled the room, uncertain and anxious. She stood before them without podium or teleprompter. I am not here as an executive, she began. I am here as someone who refuses to let this company be defined by fraud. She spoke of accountability, of protecting pensions, of restoring integrity. She did not promise miracles. She promised transparency. Applause rose slowly at first, then gathered force. Outside markets adjusted. Inside, something more important shifted. Grant had believed she would crumble under pressure. Martin had believed she could be sidelined. Nina had believed survival meant attack. Emma understood now that survival meant clarity, and clarity once sharpened cuts deeper than anger ever could. The trial did not begin with shouting. It began with silence so heavy it felt engineered. United States District Court, Seattle. Reporters filled every bench, cameras angled, pens poised. Grant Hollis sat at the defense table in a suit that still fit but no longer commanded. The polish was gone. The certainty had thinned. His jaw remained tight, his posture disciplined, but the room did not bend around him the way it once had in boardrooms. Across the aisle, federal prosecutors stacked documents that traced fraud across years, across shell companies, across manipulated numbers dressed as growth. Behind them, employees of Northbridge watched, some with anger, some with quiet betrayal. Emma entered without spectacle. She did not wear white this time. She wore a simple dark dress, structured but unadorned. Her hair was pulled back, her expression composed. She did not look victorious. She looked steady. Nina testified, first voice, measured, detailing financial coordination, the strategic leaks, the offshore diversions. When the defense implied she was acting out of personal resentment, Nina responded without raising her tone. I was an asset he believed he controlled, she said. When I ceased to be useful, I became disposable. The pattern is not personal, it is structural. Martin Hale followed under a plea agreement. His arrogance had drained into fatigue. He confirmed the shared manipulation of revenue forecasts, the concealed liabilities, the deliberate effort to inflate valuation before acquisition. He admitted to leveraging board influence to remove Emma under the guise of stability. The courtroom absorbed each word like a ledger being balanced in public. When Emma took the stand, the air shifted. The prosecutor asked directly whether the acquisition had been a vendetta. Emma looked toward the jury, then toward Grant. For 5 years, she began, I was told I was small, that my work did not matter, that my father was irrelevant. But this case is not about pride. It is about accountability. Northbridge Systems was not a toy to inflate ego. It was 6,000 employees trusting leadership. It was investors trusting transparency. She paused, allowing the weight to settle. No one forced Mr. Hollis to falsify records. He chose it. During cross-examination, the defense attempted one final strike. They questioned her decision to wear a recording device in Martin's office. They implied entrapment, manipulation, ambition, masked as righteousness. Emma did not flinch. "You cannot entrap someone into confessing a crime they did not commit," she said evenly. "Pressure reveals structure. It does not invent it." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The verdict came after 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on securities fraud. Guilty on wire fraud. Guilty on conspiracy to launder funds. Guilty on obstruction. The list extended like a closing chapter written in firm ink. The judge's sentence was measured and direct. "You were given opportunity," she told Grant. "You treated it as entitlement. 25 years in federal custody. No eligibility for early release within the first 20. The gavel struck once. Grant did not look at Emma as he was led away. For the first time, he looked uncertain of who he had been. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, questions shouted, but Emma did not linger. The legal victory was not the end. It was correction. In the months that followed, she declined to reclaim her position by decree. Instead, she rebuilt Northbridge through governance reforms, transparent audits, and a public commitment to ethical oversight. She reinstated internal compliance mechanisms and invited third-party review. Investors returned cautiously. Employees returned fully. There was one more reckoning. Evidence recovered during the investigation revealed that Northbridge's flagship artificial intelligence platform had originated from a smaller startup forced into bankruptcy years earlier. Its founder, Dr. Leah Bennett, had been pushed out through predatory tactics orchestrated under Grant's direction. Emma sought her out personally, not with cameras, not with press. She offered restoration equity and leadership of a new innovation division built under her own name. Leah accepted, not out of charity, but because recognition matters. Emma also confronted her father publicly regarding his early investments in environmentally harmful ventures decades prior. She acknowledged the truth without dilution. She announced substantial funding for restoration initiatives and independent oversight. Redemption, she stated at a press conference, is not denial. It is correction sustained over time. Ray stood in the background, silent, approving. Not because she defended him, but because she held him accountable. 1 year later, Northbridge reported stable growth, not explosive. Sustainable, not inflated. The culture inside the company had shifted from fear to responsibility. Emma no longer introduced herself as interim anything. She did not speak about revenge. She spoke about structure, about integrity, about resilience without theatrics. In a quiet kitchen outside the city, she slid a loaf of sourdough from the oven. The crust cracked softly as it cooled, the scent filling the room. Eli Parker leaned against the doorway, sleeves rolled, soil still on his hands from helping Ray replant a small garden. "That smells incredible," he said. Emma smiled, not because of triumph, not because of vindication, but because she no longer felt the need to shrink herself to fit someone else's vision of power. Grant had believed he divorced weakness. In truth, he severed himself from the one person who would have stood beside him honestly. He chased elevation without foundation. Emma built foundation without spectacle. And in the end, the quiet strength he dismissed proved stronger than the empire he tried to fake. From a strategic perspective, this story is not simply about betrayal or revenge. It is about structural power. Real power does not announce itself in tailored suits or inflated projections. It moves quietly, builds patiently, and reveals itself only when pressure demands it. Grant confused valuation with value. Emma understood the difference. One chased optics. The other rebuilt foundations. In corporate governance, as in life, character is not proven in ascent, but in correction. Integrity is expensive in the short term, but fraud is catastrophic in the long term. Emma did not win because of inherited wealth. She won because she chose accountability over ego, transparency over image, and courage over comfort. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe so we can continue exploring narratives where strength is redefined and power is reclaimed with purpose. And in the comments, leave 3 simple words that capture this journey: quiet, true power.